The text came on a Tuesday. Unknown number. Hospital. Cancer. 3 months to live. Your father. 5 clinical words that collapsed 15 years of carefully constructed distance into nothing. My father was dying and wanted to see me. My father. The man whose rage had defined my childhood, whose criticism had shaped my insecurities, whose emotional absence had taught me that love was conditional, was asking for forgiveness with his final breaths. I stood in my kitchen, phone clutched in my suddenly cold hand, and felt the careful architecture of my adult life tremble. I had built everything, my career, my marriage, my sense of self, in deliberate opposition to him. Now he was summoning me back, using the ultimate trump card, his impending death. What does one owe a dying parent who was never really a parent at all? The knife I'd been using to dice onions lay abandoned on the cutting board, the half-prepared dinner forgotten. My husband Ryan found me like that, staring at my phone, when he came home from work. One look at my face, and he knew something had shifted in our carefully constructed world. I showed him the text without speaking. I should go see him, I said eventually, surprising even myself. Before it's too late. Ryan's concern was immediate and visible, etched in the furrow of his brow, the tightening of his jaw. He knew the stories. He'd held me through nightmares where my father's voice still echoed. He'd watched me rebuild myself from the foundation up. And now I was proposing to walk back into the blast radius. If that's what you need to do, he said finally, I'll support you. But I'm worried about what this will do to you. So was I? My memories of childhood come in fragments, like pieces of a broken mirror reflecting different versions of the same man. There was the father who coached my soccer team when I was 7, beaming with undisguised pride when I scored a goal. The father who taught me to fish, his patience seemingly infinite as I tangled line after line. The father who helped with algebra homework at the kitchen table, explaining equations with a clarity my teacher never managed. Then there was the other father, the one who came home late smelling of whiskey and rage. The one who threw a plate against the wall because dinner was cold. The one who called me worthless when I failed a science test. The one whose footsteps in the hallway made us all tense, collectively bracing for the storm. He never hit us, he was too calculated for that. His violence was against objects, not people. A fist through drywall. A coffee mug shattered in the sink. A door slammed so hard the hinges bent. His real weapons were words, precisely aimed to inflict maximum damage. You'll never amount to anything. Can't you do anything right? This is why nobody respects you. My mother walked on eggshells, managing his moods, shielding us when she could. My sister Ellie became the perfect daughter, straight as, never a toe out of line, trying to avoid his disappointment. I became the rebel, figuring if I was going to be punished anyway, I might as well earn it. I remember the Christmas when I was 14. Mom had spent weeks planning the perfect holiday, handmade decorations, special recipes, carefully wrapped gifts. Dad had promised to be home by 5 for our traditional evening of carols and hot chocolate before dinner. By 7, the cocoa was cold, the dinner overcooked, and Mom's eyes were red-rimmed from crying in the bathroom when she thought we couldn't hear. He stumbled in at 9, reeking of scotch and cigarettes, a client dinner that couldn't be avoided, he claimed. When Mom quietly mentioned her disappointment, he exploded. The Christmas tree toppled, ornaments shattering across the hardwood floor, including the delicate glass angel that had been my grandmother's. I can still see the look on my mother's face as she knelt among the broken pieces, gathering them with trembling hands while he stormed upstairs. The next morning, he acted as if nothing had happened. This was his pattern, eruption followed by amnesia, leaving the rest of us to navigate emotional wreckage he refused to acknowledge. At 16, after a particularly brutal fight about my attitude problem, I packed a backpack and went to stay with my best friend's family. One night turned into a week, then a month. Mom would visit, bringing clothes and tearful pleas to come home. Dad never came, never called. His silence communicated everything. If I wouldn't live by his rules, I wasn't worth pursuing. The Hendersons, my friend Kate's family, became my safe harbor. Mr. Henderson showed me what a father could be. Someone who listened more than he spoke, who viewed anger as a last resort rather than a first response, who treated his children as people with valid thoughts and feelings rather than extensions of himself to be controlled. In their household, disagreements were discussions, not declarations of war. I finished high school living with them, the guest room gradually transforming into my space. got a scholarship to a college 6 states away, built a life deliberately unlike anything my father would approve of, art school instead of business, creativity instead of practicality. I married Ryan, a kind man who approached anger like a foreign language he refused to learn. Over the years, Mom would occasionally mention that Dad had asked about me. I never responded. When she died unexpectedly from an aneurysm, I returned for the funeral but stayed in a hotel. Dad and I exchanged perhaps 10 words total, all of them about funeral arrangements. He looked older, grayer, smaller somehow, but I refused to see past the armor of my resentment. It was easier that way. Ellie kept in minimal contact with him, obligatory holiday calls, occasional updates about her children that she shared with me afterward. He's mellowed, she would tell me. He's different now. I never believed her. People like our father didn't change. They just found new ways to control people. Yet here I was, 3 days after his message, sitting in my car outside the hospital, trying to find the courage to walk inside. The rational part of my brain knew this visit wasn't really for him. It was for me. A chance to put a period at the end of our story rather than leaving it as an unresolved ellipsis. The emotional part of me was still that 16-year-old girl, terrified of his judgment, his disappointment, his unpredictable moods. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, a habit born of years of his criticism. Your hair looks like you don't even try. Why do you wear those clothes that make you look heavier than you are? First impressions matter, Jordan, and you're making a terrible one. I smoothed my blouse, tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, applied lip balm. Ridiculous preparations to meet a dying man who had forfeited any right to judge me years ago. Ryan had offered to come with me, to wait in the car or the lobby, to be nearby if I needed support. I'd refused, needing to face this alone. But I texted him before getting out of the car, about to go in. Love you. His response was immediate. You've got this. Call me anytime. Proud of you. 3 simple sentences that contained more genuine support than I'd ever received from the man I was about to see. The oncology ward was quiet except for the soft beeping of machines and the squeak of nurses' shoes on linoleum. Standing outside room 412, my hand hovering over the handle, I felt 16 again, the familiar dread of confronting him settling in my stomach like a stone. It had been easier to agree to this meeting from the safety of my home 300 miles away. Now, seconds from seeing him, my body remembered what my mind had tried to forget, the visceral fear of disappointing this man. Nothing could have prepared me for the frail figure in the hospital bed. This diminished version of my father, his once thick hair now wispy and white, his powerful frame swallowed by the hospital gown, seemed impossible. The monitors surrounding him made him look fragile, tethered to life by wires and digital readouts. His eyes, the same deep brown as mine, widened at my entrance. There was wonder in his gaze, as if I'd performed a miracle simply by showing up. I approached the bed cautiously, unsure of the protocol for reuniting with your dying estranged father. No embraces were exchanged. Instead, I stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed, a stranger with his DNA. The sterile room contained no personal items, no photos, no evidence that anyone in his life cared enough to make this room feel like something other than a waiting room for death. Just a standard-issue hospital room and a single, get well, card that had to be from Ellie. His confession came haltingly, how therapy had helped him recognize the damage he'd inflicted, how the cancer diagnosis had clarified his priorities, how desperately he wanted to make amends in whatever time he had left. The father I remembered never admitted weakness or fault, yet here he was acknowledging his failures with a frankness that caught me off guard. He spoke of his regret over missed years, over not seeing my college graduation, not attending my wedding, not knowing the woman I'd become. He claimed to have followed my career from afar, keeping a folder of articles I'd written for design magazines, proud of my success but too stubborn, too ashamed to reach out. A nurse interrupted briefly, checking his vitals with practiced efficiency. Family is the best medicine, she remarked with a perfunctory smile as she noticed me. Family. We hadn't been a family in 15 years. We were strangers connected by blood and trauma. I listened to his apologies with a detached sort of curiosity, as if he were a character in a movie rather than the architect of my deepest insecurities. Part of me was waiting for the mask to slip, for the familiar anger to surface, for this performance of contrition to reveal itself as another manipulation. But it never came. Either he had genuinely changed, or terminal illness had made him a better actor. As I prepared to leave, promising to return the next day though not entirely sure I would, he asked about my work, my life, my happiness. Questions he'd never bothered to ask when it would have mattered. I gave him abbreviated answers, unwilling to hand over too much of myself too quickly. Each personal detail felt like a potential weapon I was placing in his hands, old habits of self-protection dying hard. In the parking lot afterward, I sat in my car for nearly an hour, gripping the steering wheel, unexpected tears clouding my vision. I wasn't crying for him, I realized, but for the father he could have been, for the relationship we might have had if he'd been capable of this kind of reflection and remorse years ago. As I drove home that evening, I felt strangely unmoored. I had built my adult identity in opposition to this man, defined myself by what I was not angry, not cruel, not him. If he had changed, truly changed, where did that leave me? 2 weeks later, I found myself staying in Ellie's guest room instead of a hotel. My sister's relief at my presence was palpable. She had been shouldering the burden of Dad's illness alone, visiting daily, coordinating with doctors, handling paperwork. The strain had etched new lines around her eyes, added a tightness to her shoulders that hadn't been there at Christmas. Ellie had always been the dutiful daughter, maintaining the minimum connection required by familial obligation. Now she was his primary caretaker, a role she'd never asked for and wasn't equipped for, especially with 2 young children demanding her attention at home. We fell into a routine with surprising ease. Mornings at Ellie's house with her husband Dave and their kids. Afternoons at the hospital. Evenings processing the emotional toll of the day. Ryan had been supportive of my decision to take a leave from work, handling our clients with his usual competence. The first few hospital visits remained strained, tentative. I would bring books to read aloud when conversation faltered, neutral territory that required no emotional excavation. Gradually, though, something began to shift. Perhaps it was the inevitability of his death creating a safe container for honesty. Perhaps it was simple proximity breaking down walls that distance had maintained. Dad grew weaker by the day. The cancer was aggressive, the treatment options limited to pain management and comfort care. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, our interactions deepened. Protected by the knowledge that our time was finite, we ventured into territory that had always been forbidden. He shared stories of his own childhood trauma, the violent alcoholic father I never knew existed, the broken arm at 12 from spilling paint in the garage. These revelations shouldn't have changed anything. One generation's trauma doesn't excuse passing it to the next, but they shifted something in my understanding. I began to see him not as a monster, but as a deeply flawed human being who had never addressed his own wounds and instead created new ones in his children. It didn't absolve him, but it offered context that had been missing from my narrative of our family. He claimed to have promised himself he would never hit his children. He kept that promise, technically, but admitted now that he hadn't understood how many ways there were to hurt someone without laying a hand on them. I told him about the panic attacks in college when a professor's criticism triggered memories of his verbal assaults. The relationship issues stemming from my fear of conflict. The perfectionism that was both my shield and my prison. The years of therapy required to unlearn the lessons he had taught me. He listened with tears tracking silently down his sunken cheeks, nodding occasionally, making no attempt to defend himself. These moments of clarity and contrition came between increasing periods of medication-induced drowsiness. Sometimes he would drift off mid-thought, leaving me to sit with his incomplete ruminations and my own turbulent emotions. One afternoon, he asked me to retrieve a small leather-bound notebook from his bedside drawer. Inside, in his precise handwriting, were fragments of thoughts, apologies never delivered, moments he wished he could reclaim. He'd been keeping this journal for years, he explained, at his therapist's suggestion. A place to process his regrets, to practice the accountability he'd evaded for so long. May 17th, Jordan's birthday. She's 32 today. Wonder if she's happy. Wonder if she ever thinks of me. I dream sometimes that I get to start over, do it all differently. Be the father she deserved. August 3rd, saw an article about Jordan's design firm winning an award. Wanted to send flowers or a card. Chickened out again. What right do I have to intrude on her success when I doubted her path every step of the way? November 14th, Dr. Winters asked what I would say to Jordan if I could say anything without fear. I would tell her I was wrong. About everything. About who she was, who she could become. I would tell her that the person I'm most angry with is myself, for being too blind to see the incredible woman standing right in front of me. Reading his private thoughts felt invasive and illuminating at once, a glimpse into a mind I'd spent years trying to decipher from the outside. The man who wrote these words was not the father I remembered. He was someone more reflective, more vulnerable, more human than the tyrant of my childhood. It was during one of his more lucid periods that he made the request that would upend everything. He wanted me to join him for a therapy session with his psychologist, Dr. Winters. He framed it as an opportunity for healing, for not leaving things unfinished between us. The request blindsided me. I'd spent years in my own therapy, working through the damage he'd inflicted. The idea of entering a therapeutic space with him, of exposing my still tender wounds to his gaze, felt both terrifying and strangely compelling. That night, I called my own therapist back home for guidance. Dr. Myers reminded me that forgiveness wasn't an obligation, it was a choice, and sometimes not the right one. The question was, what did I need from these final weeks with my father? I didn't have an answer. Part of me, the wounded child part, wanted him to suffer as I had suffered, wanted him to die knowing he had irreparably broken something precious. Another part, the adult who had worked so hard to heal, wondered if participating in his redemption arc might actually be healing for me too. The next day, I agreed to the joint therapy session, scheduled for the end of the week. I didn't know then that it would change everything. Dr. Sarah Winter's office was warm and inviting, with soft lighting and comfortable furniture arranged to facilitate conversation. Dad arrived via patient transport, wheelchair-bound now, a hospital aide helping him settle into one of the plush armchairs before discreetly departing. After establishing ground rules for our session, Dr. Winters invited my father to begin. His nervousness was palpable, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his position. His opening statements were those of a man who had done significant psychological work, distinguishing between understanding and excusing his behavior, acknowledging patterns of fear misinterpreted as respect, recognizing cycles of intergenerational trauma. These were insights I'd reached years ago in my own therapy, but hearing them from him directly was different, validating in a way I hadn't expected. When I questioned why he hadn't reached out sooner, his admission of cowardice seemed genuine. He claimed to have made attempts, calls abandoned before completion, letters written but never sent, all derailed by fear of rejection, a rejection he knew he deserved. Then came the moment that changed everything. I don't have cancer. The 4 words hung in the air between us, incomprehensible at first. I looked from him to Dr. Winters and back again, waiting for clarification that would make sense of this statement. The truth emerged in halting fragments. He had been hospitalized, not for cancer but for depression, a psychiatric hold after a suicide attempt. Upon release, he had fabricated the cancer diagnosis, knowing it was the only way I might agree to see him. The room seemed to tilt around me as the implications sank in. All of it, the hospital visits, the reconciliation, Ellie taking time off work to care for him. It was all built on a calculated deception. Ellie didn't even know. She believed the cancer diagnosis too. Only Dr. Winters knew the truth. My mind frantically reviewed the past weeks, recasting every interaction through this new lens. The hospital room were rented, not assigned. The medical equipment, props in an elaborate production. The fatigue and weight loss, potentially real, but from depression and anxiety, not cancer. The medication-induced drowsiness, antidepressants and anti-anxiety drugs, not pain management. The sense of violation was profound. I had opened myself to him, shared vulnerable truths, begun the painful process of reassessing our relationship, all under false pretenses. I had appended my life, taken leave from work, subjected myself to the emotional turmoil of reconnecting with my abuser because I believed he was dying. The cruelty of this deception seemed to confirm everything I had believed about him, that he was fundamentally manipulative, willing to inflict pain to get what he wanted. The betrayal was breathtaking in its completeness. I stood abruptly, needing physical distance from this new violation. His attempts to explain fell on deaf ears. His insistence that while the cancer was a lie, the remorse and desire to reconnect were real meant nothing against the magnitude of the deception. Dr. Winters attempted to mediate, to create space for understanding the desperation that had driven him to such an extreme measure. I was in no state to hear it. My entire body thrummed with a fight-or-flight response so intense it made my vision blur at the edges. As I reached for the door, his final desperate words stopped me momentarily. The suicide attempt had been serious, not a cry for help, but a planned exit. Our reconnection had given him a reason to live. Without it, he feared he wouldn't survive. Was this another manipulation? Or was this, finally, the raw truth? I couldn't tell, and that uncertainty was almost as painful as the lie itself. I left him with a single directive: don't contact me. Don't come looking for me. I would reach out if and when I was ready. I checked into a hotel that night, unable to face Ellie and explain what had happened. How do you tell someone that their mutual suffering, their shared grief and reconciliation process, was built on a foundation of lies? The hotel room became a liminal space where I could fall apart without witnesses. I cycled through emotions with dizzying speed, rage that left me pacing the small room, smothering screams into pillows, grief that bent me double on the bathroom floor, betrayal that felt like a physical wound, and beneath it all, a terrible confusion. Sobbing on the phone to Ryan, I cycled through rage, betrayal, confusion, and a peculiar, unwelcome grief. The most painful realization was that the reconciliation had been working. I had started to believe he had changed, that we might actually find some kind of peace with each other. Ryan gently suggested that perhaps he had changed. The lie was undeniably wrong. Incredibly, monumentally wrong. But the conversations had felt genuine. The remorse had seemed real. But how could I trust any of it now? Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake staring at the textured ceiling of the hotel room, my mind replaying every interaction with my father since his fictional diagnosis. Had there been signs I missed? Inconsistencies in his story? Or had he simply become a better liar with age? More disturbing were the questions about my own judgment. I prided myself on seeing through pretense, on recognizing manipulation, skills honed through a childhood of navigating my father's moods. Yet I had been completely fooled. What did that say about my ability to discern truth from fiction, authenticity from performance? The next morning, Dr. Winters texted me my father's new address, should I ever want to contact him. I didn't respond. 3 days later, I finally met with Ellie at a cafe far from her house, far from anywhere Dad might be. Watching her face crumple as I revealed the truth was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Her repeated questions, why would he do this, had no satisfactory answers, only theories, desperation, mental illness, a lifetime of emotional dysfunction reaching its inevitable conclusion. Ellie's reaction evolved from shock to anger to a complex grief. She had genuinely believed in his transformation, had invested emotionally in his redemption arc. The revelation that it was predicated on a lie shook her faith not just in him, but in her own ability to judge character. We sat in that cafe for hours, piecing together the fragments of truth amid the deception. He really had been seeing Dr. Winters for years. The therapy journal appeared genuine. The insights about his behavior seemed too specific, too accurate to be fabricated. But the cancer, the catalyst for our reconnection, had been a calculated fabrication. I returned home the next day, throwing myself into work, trying to reclaim the life that had been interrupted by this bizarre family drama. But concentration proved impossible. The questions followed me everywhere. Was Dad truly suicidal, or was that another manipulation? Had the apologies and insights been genuine, or carefully crafted performance art? Was I walking away from a real chance at healing, or protecting myself from further harm? Ryan watched me with growing concern as I moved through our home like a ghost, present physically but emotionally elsewhere. At night, I would wake from dreams where I was searching for something in a hospital, opening door after door, but finding only empty rooms. 2 weeks after the revelation, a large manila envelope arrived at my office. Inside was a stack of papers, medical records, therapy notes, prescription histories, all with my father's name. His handwritten note explained that while the cancer was a lie, his therapeutic journey was not. Dr. Winters had authorized the release of these records so I could verify his claims about treatment. The documents remained untouched on my desk for 3 days before curiosity overcame anger. The records confirmed his story. 3 years of consistent therapy, a serious suicide attempt 6 weeks before he contacted me, multiple medication trials for depression and anxiety. Progress notes from Dr. Winters documented his persistent desire to reconnect with his children, particularly me. Most revealing was a therapy goal written in his own handwriting from 2 years earlier, to become the kind of father my children deserved, even if it's too late for them to see it. I sat with this information for another week, discussing it in sessions with Dr. Myers, unpacking the complex tangle of emotions it evoked. Anger remained, but something else was emerging alongside it, a grudging understanding. Dr. Myers posed a critical question. If he had simply called and said, "I've been in therapy, I've changed, I'd like to reconnect," would I have given him a chance? The answer was immediate and certain, no. Sometimes desperate people make desperate choices, she observed. The question now is, what do you want moving forward? It was the same question she had asked before the joint therapy session, but now I had an answer. I wanted to know if there was anything real beneath the lie. His apartment complex was modest but well-maintained, flowering plants flanking the entryway. Standing outside apartment 3B, déjà vu washed over me, just like at the hospital, poised on the threshold of an impossible conversation. For a moment, I considered turning back. It would be simpler to walk away, to file this bizarre episode under further evidence of my father's dysfunction, and return to the life I'd built without him. The life that was stable, predictable, safe. But I had come this far. The surprise in his eyes when he opened the door seemed genuine, as did the tentative hope that followed. He appeared smaller somehow, dressed in civilian clothes instead of a hospital gown, the imposing father of my childhood reduced to an aging man with obvious regrets. The apartment itself revealed more than any conversation could have. Sparsely furnished but immaculately kept. Bookshelves lined with psychology texts and recovery literature. A meditation cushion in the corner. No alcohol visible anywhere, a significant change from the father I remembered, who always had a glass of something amber within reach. On the wall, to my astonishment, hung a professional photograph of me from a design awards ceremony 3 years prior, alongside a similar photo of Ellie with her family. He had been following our lives from afar, maintaining connections we knew nothing about. I laid out my conditions without preamble, complete honesty about everything. No matter how difficult or shameful, he would tell Ellie the truth himself. Today, he would continue therapy regardless of my decision about our relationship. And most importantly, he would understand that forgiveness wasn't guaranteed. I was there to understand, not to absolve. He accepted each condition without protest. When asked why he had created such an elaborate deception rather than simply reaching out honestly, his explanation was both disturbing in its calculation and pitiable in its desperation. After his psychiatric hospitalization, he had watched a medical drama featuring an estranged father with terminal cancer reconnecting with his child. Something had clicked, the realization that impending death might open a door otherwise permanently closed. But something unexpected had happened once the deception began. The moment he heard my voice, saw me enter his hospital room, he had developed a desperate desire to live, to have more time, to earn back some small place in my life. He had trapped himself in his own lie, afraid that revealing the truth would destroy this fragile new connection. As he spoke, I searched for signs of the old manipulations, the subtle blame-shifting and guilt trips that had been his specialty. But his accountability seemed complete, his remorse genuine. I told him about my years of therapy dealing with the effects of his parenting, the anxiety, the perfectionism, the fear of conflict. Did he understand the damage he had caused? His response was measured. He was beginning to understand, and would spend whatever time he had left trying to understand it better, trying to be someone who helped heal that damage rather than someone who added to it. Something shifted in me then, not forgiveness exactly, but a willingness to consider the possibility that people, even people who have hurt us deeply, can change. That redemption, while never guaranteed, is sometimes possible. I didn't know if I could trust him again. Trust had to be earned, and he had given me every reason not to trust him. But I was willing to find out, slowly, with firm boundaries and a zero-tolerance policy for further deception. The hope that dawned on his face was almost painful to witness, a drowning man glimpsing a distant shore. As I drove home that evening, I contemplated the strange journey that had brought us to this point. A fabricated death sentence had created an opening for a relationship that might actually live. The lie had been inexcusable, but the connection it facilitated might, with time and work, become something real. In the weeks that followed, we established a careful routine. Weekly coffee meetings in public places. Topics limited to the present, the past addressed only within the context of therapy sessions with Dr. Winters. Small steps toward a relationship neither of us had models for, not father and daughter in the traditional sense, but two adults with a complicated shared history, trying to build something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. There were setbacks. Moments when old patterns threatened to emerge, when his need for control or my instinct for self-protection created tension. There were also unexpected discoveries, shared interests in art and literature that had gone unexplored during my childhood, similar senses of humor that surfaced once the weight of our history temporarily lifted. Ellie joined us occasionally, her own relationship with our father evolving in parallel but distinct ways. The three of us together felt like an entirely new configuration, a family being formed rather than one being repaired. I hadn't forgiven him, not yet, maybe not ever completely. But I had chosen to give us both a second chance. Not because he deserved it, but because I deserved to find out if there was anything worth salvaging from the wreckage of our past. Sometimes the most unexpected twists in our stories lead us exactly where we need to go. A lie had created space for truth. A false ending had opened the possibility of a new beginning. Do you think I'm making a mistake by giving him another chance? Or would walking away now be its own kind of regret?